Hello, and welcome back to Words and Pixels. So back in fall, we had taken a look at some upcoming fall books, and now we're going to take a look at some books that are coming out in the winter of 2021. Okay, you just want to come? Okay. My cat has decided she just wants to come up, so that's where she's going to be. So anyway, there are a lot of books coming out this winter, and just for the purposes of this video, we're going to define winter as January, February, and March. I know technically not all of March is winter, but for the purposes of this video, it's just going to be winter because there's books that I want to include there that I'm probably not going to get around to include in the spring video. Now, a couple disclaimers before we start. Disclaimer number one is that I am not sponsored at all, meaning that no authors sent me these books to recommend, no publishers sent me these books to recommend. I have not read or received ARCs for any of these books. These are just books that I have seen reviewed either on Goodreads or in book blogs or in book journals and thought sounded interesting. Disclaimer number two, just cat hair everywhere. Disclaimer number two is that publication dates change. Right now, as of the recording of this video, the publication dates that I'm going to be listing should be accurate, but it's totally possible that they might change at some point. Okay, you want to go off now? Disclaimer number three is that these are just books that I think are interesting that are coming out. I tend to have an interest in YA fiction, as well as just general speculative fiction. So a lot of the books are just going to be from those genres. Anyway, let's hop into the books. First book that we have is Glimpsed by G.F. Miller, which is coming out on January 5th. So this is a YA fantasy and a romance. And let me read out the summary to you. Charity is a fairy godmother. She doesn't wear a poofy dress or go around waving a wand, but she does make sure the deepest desires of the student population at Jack London High School come true. And she knows what they want, even better than they do, because she can glimpse their perfect futures. But when Charity fulfills a glimpse that gets Viba crowned homecoming queen, it ends in a disaster. Suddenly, every wish Charity has ever granted is called into question. Has she really been helping people? Where do these glimpses come from anyway? What if she's not getting the whole picture? Making this existential crisis way worse is Noah, the adorable and, in Charity's opinion, diabolical ex of one of her past clients, who blames her for sabotaging his prom plans and claims her interventions are doing more harm than good. He demands that she stop granting wishes and help him get his girl back. At first, Charity has no choice but to play along, but soon Noah becomes an unexpected ally in getting to the bottom of the glimpses. Before long, Charity dares to even call him her friend, and starts to wish that he were something more. But can the fairy godmother get the happily ever after? So that's cute. I like the idea of this character who is usually in the role of the fairy godmother, who's usually the one helping grant wishes and helping make sure that people's dreams come true. And now not only is she doubting herself, so like she's doubting her ability to do that, but she also is trying to get her own happily ever after and her own wish coming true. And I think that that's kind of a interesting idea. It definitely sounds like a lighthearted, kind of romantic comedy type of book with a little hint of fantasy in it. So I'm looking forward to checking out that one. Then we also have, which is coming out on the same day, January 5th, Happily Ever Afters by Elise Bryant. And this is actually one of the books that I'm probably most excited for. And you might understand why after I read out the description. So this is a young adult romance. 16-year-old Tessa Johnson has never felt like the protagonist of her own life. She's rarely seen herself reflected in the pages of the romance novels she loves. The only place she's a true leading lady is in her own writing, the swoony love story she shares only with Carolyn, her best friend and #1 devoted reader. When Tessa is accepted into the creative writing program of a prestigious art school, she's excited to finally let her story shine. But when she goes to her first workshop, the words are just gone. Fortunately, Caroline has a solution. Tessa just needs to find some inspiration in a real-life love story of her own, and she's ready with a list of romance novel-inspired steps to a happily ever after that will surely refill Tessa's creative well. Nico, the brooding artist who looks like he just walked out of one of Tessa's stories, is cast as the perfect Prince Charming. But as Tessa checks each item off Caroline's list, she gets further and further away from finding her words and herself again. She risks losing her parents' trust, her spot in the writing program, and her friendships, including the surprising bond she develops with Sam, an aspiring baker who lives across the street. She's well on her way to having her own real-life love story, yet she can't help but to wonder, is it the one she wants after all? So I love this one for a number of reasons. One, and most obviously because it revolves around writing and reading. I kind of expect there to be a lot of lampshade hanging because it is a romance novel that is kind of aware of a lot of those romance tropes. And that's kind of the idea of the story, is her trying to recreate some of those tropes in order to inspire her own writing. And of course, we also have a protagonist of color. I like that the description mentions how she feels like she doesn't see herself reflected in the pages of romance novels. And when you look back at a lot of the classic romance novels, you know, it's a lot of white leading ladies, you know, there's not a lot of people of color there. So I think that that would be an interesting plot point to explore as well. It just has a lot of elements that I like in one story, and I'm interested in seeing how they all kind of meld together. So I think this one's definitely on my radar. I'm gonna try to see if I could pick it up this week, hopefully when it comes out, and I will let you know what I think of it. The next one we have is going to be extremely quick. This is coming out on January 12th, and that is Tales from the Hinterland by Melissa Albert. So the genre for this is going to be young adult fantasy and short stories. So let me just read the summary that the publisher provided, and then I'll go ahead and explain it a little more. A gorgeously illustrated collection of 12 fairy tales by the author of The Hazel Wood and the Night Country. Journey into the hinterland, a brutal and beautiful world where a young woman spends the night with death, brides are wed to a mysterious house in the trees, and an enchantress is killed twice and still lives. So The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert was one of my favorite books that I had read this year. It was actually the book that got me back into reading because I had gone through a really long reading slump. Maybe I'll make a video talking about that one day. But I'd gone through an extremely long reading slump, and I had just picked up this book because it sounded interesting. I was at Barnes & Noble, I just bought it and read it, and I loved it, and it really just kind of reignited my love of reading. So I owe a lot to this book. I think that the Tales of the Hinterland is going to be interesting because the premise of this is it's about a girl whose grandmother had written a short story collection called Tales from the Hinterland with all of these fairy tales, and the characters from the fairy tales kind of start coming to life and appearing in the real world, and the protagonist has to figure out what's going on with this, and there's a bunch of other stuff happening too. It does sound like you can read the short story collection without actually having any knowledge of the duology that had come out, that it's connected to. The fairy tales from the book, at least like the glimpses that you kind of get of them in the book, you get kind of like little snippets of passages sometimes. I do remember them just kind of feeling a lot like Grimm's fairy tales, just like, you know, just a regular fairy tale. So I'm imagining that these are going to just feel like independent short stories. I'm very excited for that. I really liked the world of this book. I really loved the author's writing, and I definitely think that reading her short stories is going to be a good experience. So if you like short stories, I would check it out. If you read The Hazelwood and you like The Hazelwood and its sequel book, which I'm forgetting the name of, I think it's Night Journey, check out Tales of the Hinterland. Okay, next we have a straight fantasy. So this is Wings of Ebony, which is coming out on January 26th by J.L., and this is a young adult fantasy. Make a way out of no way is just the way of life for Rue. But when her mother is shot dead on her doorstep, life for her and her younger sister changes forever. Rue's taken from her neighborhood by the father she never knew, forced to leave her little sister behind, and whisked away to Gaizen, a hidden island of magic wielders. Rue is the only half-god, half-human there, where leaders protect their magical powers at all costs and thrive on human suffering. Miserable and desperate to see her sister on the anniversary of her mother's death, Rue breaks Gaizen's sacred "do not leave" law and returns to Houston, only to discover that Black kids are being forced into crime and violence, and her sister Tasha is in danger of falling sway to the very forces that claim their mother's life. Worse still, evidence mounts that the evil plaguing East Row is the same one that lurks in Gaizen, an evil that will stop at nothing until it has stolen everything from her and everyone she loves. Rue must embrace her true identity and wield the full magnitude of her ancestors' powers to save her neighborhood before the gods burn it to the ground. So I love the concept of this one. I like the idea of the protagonist switching between the real world, where, you know, she's got her sister and a lot of real life problems, and then there's also this fantasy world that she has to figure out and navigate as well. And I like the idea that the problems of the fantasy world, whatever is plaguing this fantasy world, is also responsible for a lot of the real life problems that are affecting her real neighborhood. I kind of like the idea of merging fantasy with kind of a modern neighborhood setting. Kind of reminds me of Vampires versus the Bronx. I had watched that recently on Netflix and it was super good. And the idea of that story was they were vampires that were invading the Bronx, and the kids who lived there were trying to defend their neighborhood, and they were trying to defend their way of life and the people who lived there and their neighbors that they loved and the place that they had grown up. And it seems like there's a similar sort of vibe with this, although this seems to be handling it in a much more serious way. But just this idea of blending this kind of fantastical, magical threat with just real life neighborhood and just growing up and, you know, trying to preserve the community, I think is just kind of a interesting blend of ideas there. So that is January 26th. So that's it for January, and now we have some titles coming out in February. So first title that we have is What Big Teeth, which is coming out on February 2nd, and that's by Rose, I feel like I'm gonna do a bad job with her last name, Rose Sasbo? I'm so sorry. I am really so sorry. I could not find the proper pronunciation for that, so I apologize if that was horrifically wrong. The genre is young adult, horror, and fantasy. Eleanor has not seen or spoken with her family in years, not since they sent her away to St. Brigide's boarding school. She knows them only as vague memories: her grandfather's tremendous fang snout, the barrel full of water her mother always soaked in, and the strange hunting trips in a dark wood with her sister and cousins. And she remembers the way they looked at her, like she was the freak. When Eleanor finally finds the courage to confront her family and return to their ancestral home on the rainy coast of Maine, she finds them already gathered in wait, seemingly ready to welcome her back with open arms. "I've read this in the cards," her grandmother tells her. However, Grandmother Persephone doesn't see all, for just as Eleanor is beginning to readjust to the life she always longed for, a strange and sudden death rocks the family, leaving Eleanor to manage this difficult new dynamic without help. In order to keep the family that abandoned her from falling apart, Eleanor calls upon her mysterious other grandmother, Grandmere, from across the sea. Grandmere brings order to the chaotic household, but that order soon turns to tyranny. If any of them are to survive, Eleanor must embrace her strange family and join forces with the ghost of Grandma Persephone to confront the monstrousness lurking deep within her Grandmere and herself. So there is so much going on here. At first, it was giving me Addams Family type of vibes with, like, you know, here's this girl from this creepy family. And then it just kind of goes into a whole nother level. It kind of reminds me a lot of Miss Peregrine's, which I think was its comp title. You know, you kind of have like this group of people with strange either powers or abilities. But with this, it's her family. And I love this idea of she has this really odd family, and she's the one who's the black sheep. So I'm curious to see, like, why is she the one that's like the exile from the family when they're the ones who seem like they might be monsters of some sort? I'm not really sure, but it does seem like an interesting concept. I'm curious to see how it plays out. There are a lot of elements that are going on there, so I think that's going to be a lot for the author to tie together, and I'm just excited to see how it all works out. Now we have the book I am probably the most excited for. I think I might have said that already throughout this video, but this one, man, this is one of those where like you read the description and you're just like, yes, I am so instantly on board. I need this book right now. Please give it to me. This one's gonna be good, I think. So this is The Initial Insult, which is coming out on February 23rd by Mindy McGinnis. And it is a young adult mystery thriller, but also a retelling. And I'm not gonna say what it's a retelling of. I'm just gonna read out the summary and let you guys have the opportunity to guess. Tress Montour knows her family used to mean something, until she didn't have a family anymore. When her parents disappeared 7 years ago while driving her best friend home, Tress lost everything. She might still be a Montour, but the entire town shuns her now that she lives with her drunken, one-eyed grandfather at what the locals refer to as the White Trash Zoo, a wild animal attraction featuring a zebra, a chimpanzee, and a panther, among many other things. Felicity Tornado has it all: looks, money, and a secret that she's kept hidden. She knows that one misstep could send her tumbling from the top of the social ladder, and she's worked hard to make everyone forget she was with the Montours the night they disappeared. Felicity has buried what she knows so deeply that she can't even remember what it is, only that she can't look at Tress without having a panic attack. But she'll have to. Tress has a plan. A Halloween costume party at an abandoned house provides the ideal situation for Tress to pry the truth from Felicity, brick by brick, as she slowly seals her former best friend into a coal chute. With a drunken party above them and a loose panther on the prowl, Tress will have her answers or settle for revenge. So in case you didn't pick up during the summary, this is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, which, if you have never read that short story, it's the one where a guy bricks up another guy behind a wall for revenge or something. It's a little vague. But man, what a great idea, honestly. Like, first off, just doing an Edgar Allan Poe retelling in general is like a fun idea, but choosing The Cask of Amontillado, like, that's an interesting one. There's so much material to work with there. You could even tell in the names of the characters how it kind of reflects the characters from the original story. I love it. Brilliant. I'm curious to see if there's other Edgar Allan Poe references that are in there. I think that this really has the opportunity to not only be, a little bit of horror, but it also seems like there's going to be a mystery thriller element to it too. And from what I understand, it's going to be the first book in a series. So it sounds like it's probably not going to wrap up by the end of the first book, unfortunately, but there's going to be a larger story to uncover there. And I don't know if the other books are also going to have Edgar Allan Poe references, like maybe if they're going to reference other short stories instead. But this is going to be good. This is going to be a good one. I'm excited for this. So that was it for February, and now let's take a look at March. We have the last book on the list, which is Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas, and that's going to be coming out on March 23rd. And that is a young adult fantasy mystery retelling. So I'm going to read out the summary here, and again, see if you can guess what the retelling is. I think that this one most people are going to guess right away. When children go missing, people want answers. When children go missing in the small coastal town of Astoria, people look to Wendy for answers. It's been 5 years since Wendy and her two brothers went missing in the woods. But when the town's children start to disappear, the questions surrounding her brother's mysterious circumstances are brought back into light. Attempting to flee her past, Wendy almost runs over an unconscious boy laying in the middle of the road and gets pulled into the mystery haunting the town. Peter, a boy she thought lived only in her stories, claims that if they don't do something, the missing children will meet the same fate as her brothers. In order to find them and rescue the missing kids, Wendy must confront what's waiting for her in the woods. So the author for this book is the author of Cemetery Boys, which is a book that I had talked about in my upcoming fall reads video. So the author of this book is Aidan Thomas, who was the author of Cemetery Boys, which is a book I had covered in my upcoming fall reads video. I really liked Cemetery Boys. I thought it was really, really good. I thought it was interesting too because Aidan Thomas was on the Happy Writer podcast, which is Marissa Meyer's podcast. And he was talking about Cemetery Boys, and he was talking about Lost in the Neverwoods, which is coming out. And he mentioned how Lost in the Neverwoods is actually the book that he wrote first. And when he brought it to his publisher, I think it was his publisher, they had told him that they really, really liked it, but he had given them a list of like other ideas he had, and they actually wanted Cemetery Boys to be his debut instead. So he actually wrote this book second, and he wrote that book first, but that book is going to be coming out second. So I thought that was interesting. I remember when I had picked Cemetery Boys, I had also read about, Lost in Neverwoods coming out, and I was a little like, oh, it's crazy that he's going to release a book in October or whenever this came out, and then also release a book in March. Like, it's like he's really like writing them fast. But now that makes sense that, the other book was supposed to have come out first, but ended up coming out second. But at any rate, I really like Cemetery Boys. I think Aidan Thomas is a very talented author, and I enjoyed his debut, so I am excited for his second book. I love the idea of a more modern version of Peter Pan. There's been a lot of Peter Pan retellings over the years, but I don't recall any of them being mystery thriller based the way that this one is. So I think that's an interesting twist on a classic story, and I'm excited to, again, see how he plays with it. But that's it for this video. So now your to-be-read piles, which I'm sure are already very long, can be even longer. Thank you so much for watching. I've got a couple videos coming out this month. Some of them are going to be book related. Some of them are going to be technology related. So I'm excited to share those with you guys. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful start to the new year and a wonderful rest of the day. Bye!